John chapter 20, verses 24 through 30. We'll use the plot arc to break down this passage. It begins with Thomas. Now, Thomas, also known as Didymus, which just means twin. So Thomas was a twin. Now, Thomas, one of the 12, and that lets us know he's one of the 12 apostles, right? Jesus' closest disciples. One of the 12 was not with the disciples when Jesus came. This is an important little time marker, right? When Jesus came. And this is referring to an event that happened about a week ago. And this is when Jesus came to the upper room and the disciples saw him. Thomas evidently was not there. It's interesting. They were hiding in that room together. We don't know why Thomas wasn't there. Maybe he doesn't like to grieve with other people. Maybe he likes to grieve alone. Maybe he had work to attend to. We don't know. But he wasn't there in that room. So the other disciples told him, "We have seen the Lord." Now, this is just an important sentence to kind of set us up for the rest of what's going to unfold here. But what we know at the very beginning of this is that Thomas has not seen the resurrected Jesus. Everybody else has. The women have. The other 10 disciples have, but not Thomas. So we're going to go to our plot arc, and we'll start off right here at verses 24. Thomas was not there in the upper room on the third day. And then verse 25, the disciples testified to Thomas about Jesus. That means they told him, "We've seen the resurrected Jesus." And the question is, how does Thomas respond? But, right? So that's the first one we get, which means that we already know he's not in agreement. But he said to them, "Unless I see the nail marks in his hands and put my fingers where the nails were and put my hand into his side, I will not believe." So unless, right, that's the operative word there, he sees particularly the nail marks in his hands, and I put my finger where the nails were, and I put my hand into his side. Unless this happens, I will not believe. So verse 25a is the disciples testify. But verse 25b is Thomas's response. And his response is a commitment to not believe unless he sees, touches Jesus. He doesn't even want to see a healed, body double or something like that. He wants to make sure that the place where he watched nails go into Jesus' hands, he sees the holes. He wants to make sure the place where he saw a spear enter his side, that there is a hole there. And I think we have a lot of kinship with Thomas at this moment. If you go back and you go read John chapter 11 or John chapter 14, 11 is where they're about to go to Bethany and heal Lazarus. And Thomas says, "Hey, let's go with Jesus and die with him." In John 14, that's where Jesus says, "I'm going to heaven. I'm going to prepare a place for you. Where I'm going, though, you can't follow." And Thomas says, "Tell us the way so that we can be with you." Thomas is both devoted, he wants to be with Jesus always, and he's a realist. He's like, "I can't be with you if you don't tell me the way. And hey, I'm going to be with you in Bethany, even if that means your death, even if that means I die with you." He is both a devoted follower of Christ, but he's also a realist. And he really saw nails. He really saw a spear in Jesus' side. And so please don't take this to think that Thomas is this doubt-filled man, as he's been often referred to in the church. Thomas doubts the testimony because he's this realist. And I'm so thankful that we have his perspective on things. Okay, so this first part really just gives us our intro, our setup for the story. Verse 26, A week later, his disciples were in the house again, and Thomas was with them. So back in the upper room, same, they're still in Jerusalem, and this is, like I said earlier, this is a week later. Though the doors were locked, Jesus came and stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." What a cool moment, right? There's Thomas in the house again, and the doors are locked. And I'll just point out again, the doors were locked a week ago because they were scared of the Jews. The doors are still appear to be locked. Perhaps they are still scared of the Jews. And so now we get to verse 26. We get Jesus appears suddenly before Thomas in the locked room. And one thing I want to just point out real quick is Jesus' statement to them, which is, "Peace be with you." This standard greeting in Jewish culture, right? Shalom. But wow, what theological depth to this statement, right? Because Christ is alive, death is defeated, because he is with us, because of all of these things, because all of the prophecies have come true, because he has fulfilled every promise, this peace that Jesus says, "Peace be with you," is not some pithy greeting. It is peace at the deepest possible levels given to the human heart because of his finished work on the cross. And I just want to just simply point out then that this simple greeting, "Peace be with you," reaches its fulfillment now with Jesus because of what he's done. And then Jesus singles out Thomas. He said to Thomas, "Put your finger here. See my hands. Reach out your hand and put it into my side. Stop doubting and believe." What a statement given to Thomas from Jesus. We'll go to verse 27. Thomas, stop doubting and believe. What a wonderful moment. What a wonderful moment. So he tells him to put his finger, right, and put your hand into my side, which, of course, we should be noticing, hey, doesn't that parallel exactly what Thomas said up here? And the answer is, of course, yes. That's not by accident. Jesus wasn't there for the conversation in person, but he knows what transpired and speaks accordingly to Thomas. And then his command here, stop doubting and believe. And it's the same word for belief here. It's just the opposite, the negated versus the positive version of believe. And what's so cool about John, particularly, is that John will not use the word faith typically. He doesn't typically use the word faith because we can become so static with faith. John uses much more often the word believe, right? It means that there's a choice, either to believe or not, or so to not believe, which would be this, or to believe, right? And so when you're hearing the testimony about Jesus' resurrection, you have a choice to either to actively not believe it or actively to believe it, but there's no in between. There's no one or the other. You have to keep working at believing or keep working at not believing. And he's telling you to Thomas, stop doing this one and start believing. Start believing. Well, that's all Thomas needs. Thomas said to him, "My Lord and my God." And in my opinion, that's the pinnacle of this little saga here. Verse 28, Thomas's confession of Jesus as Lord and, here's the big one, God. In the disciples, Jesus is given many titles. I said Gospels, I think. If I said disciples, I'm sorry. But in the Gospels, Jesus is given many titles. Son of Man and is probably the biggest one. But the other one is obviously Messiah. You are Messiah, the Son of God. But only here does Thomas say, "My God." And this is just one of the strongest phrasings of Jesus as God in the Gospels. This is a big deal. And it's not by accident it comes to the end of John. We're building up to this moment that Jesus is God. And he's been building up to this moment, by the way, since John 1:1, where he said, in the beginning, the Word was with God, and the Word was God. So John kind of foreshadowed this at the very beginning of his gospel, and now it's finally come to fruition. There's many points in which we could kind of understand that Thomas's confession for John might be the high point of the whole book. It might all just be leading up to this moment where we confess Jesus is Lord and God, and that's going to come down to the end. You'll see why when we get down to verse 30. But John will say that's the purpose of his book. So this confession really stands at the height of it all. Lord could be a title used for anybody from your boss to the king. But God, well, that's just one. There is only one God. And Thomas says, you are my God. And then Jesus says, because you have seen me, you have believed. Blessed are those who have not seen me and yet believe. So, right, because you have seen me. He was not going to do it unless he got this. Therefore, you have believed. Blessed, so this is a beatitude, right? The final one. Who have not seen and yet have believed. Which means that Jesus in this moment, though he says, thank you for believing, essentially, or now you believe, Thomas. Jesus' eyes are forward. They're looking ahead to the church, to the millions and billions who have not seen Jesus and yet have believed. Verse 29. So let's go back to our plot arc. We'll go verse 29. Jesus' final beatitude. And this is directed towards the church. It's directed towards us. Blessed are us. We don't get to put our hands there. We don't get to see the side, and yet we have believed. Now, for those of us who are realists, this is also why I think God brings us Thomas's testimony, because it encourages those of us who have a kindred heart with Thomas. It's hard for us to believe things that we can't see with our eyes. I think that's why the Thomas one is included. And it's still hard to accept another person's testimony, but at least you know that you're not accepting the testimony of someone who would just believe anything they heard. You're accepting the testimony of someone who would not believe until they had seen. And that's a powerful proof for us that Jesus really did come back to life. And then we have the close of the book. So this is, sorry to go back to kind of our sectioning out here, 26 through 29 is the actual story itself, kind of climaxing right here in my Lord and my God. So the big point here is Thomas's confession. Or maybe Jesus overcoming Thomas's unbelief. But earlier I said that this might be the point of the whole book. And here's why. Let's look at these final verses. Jesus performed many other signs in the presence of his disciples. Now, this is not a word that's without meaning in the book of John. John recorded for us 7 signs of Jesus performing miracles that testified to him as the Messiah. And what he's telling us now is that there were many other ones, that it wasn't just 7, that there were many. But these were the 7 that seemed to most impact John. Or at least these were the 7 that he wanted to pass on to everyone else. So first thing he says that there were many other signs. Much proof that Jesus was the Messiah given in the presence of his disciples, which are not recorded in this book, right? There isn't enough space. He's going to give another ending at the end of John 21. It feels like the end of the book, but there's actually a whole other chapter about the restoration of Peter. And he'll talk about there's not enough room in the world for everything Jesus did. But these are written that you may believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name. So he gives us the purpose of this book. Let me go back to the end here. All right, so verse 30. Oh, wait, I think I got out of sync here. Verse 30. Oh, no, I'm good. Okay. Verse 30. And verse 31. Jesus is, there were more signs more signs, and then we get the purpose of the book, to believe in Jesus as Messiah and have life. So this first one, that there were more signs that were missing, we've covered that. But verse 31, John's point in writing this whole gospel is for the reader to believe in Jesus, right? Thomas's confession that he believes Jesus is Lord and God, to believe in Jesus as Messiah and receive eternal life. And so building up to Thomas's faith here is not by accident. It's not by accident at all. This is the whole point of the gospel. In fact, many commentators will call John, rather than the author, they'll call him the evangelist, because he writes his gospel so evangelistically, so clearly with the point as to convince the reader Jesus is the Messiah. And that by believing, we may have life in his name. So belief in Jesus as Messiah is the point of the book. When we look at Thomas's story in particular, it seems to be a wonderful kind of capstone on the whole thing, because it's the ultimate act of God overcoming Thomas's committed unbelief, and Thomas is saved, right? And so are we when we put our faith in the Lord. So just a beautiful story that brings a neat and tidy end to this part of the book of John. And there is John 21, which will close even more of the book and really prep us for what's to come with Peter's restoration. But a wonderful end to the story here nonetheless.